Far across Alaska, a fracture stretches across mountains, forests, glaciers, and frozen valleys with an authority that has shaped the landscape for millions of years. It passes through some of North America's most spectacular wilderness, yet much of its activity remains hidden from human eyes. Why does one section of this immense fault remain quiet, while another has unleashed one of the most powerful continental earthquakes ever recorded? Why are scientists now placing hundreds of instruments directly across its path instead of simply watching it from a distance? Answers emerging from the latest research are transforming what was once considered a relatively straightforward strike-slip fault into a far more complex geological system whose roots may extend deep into Earth's interior. Every new discovery is revealing another piece of a puzzle that stretches from the surface of Alaska to the rocks of the lower crust, and even into the mantle itself. The Denali Fault extends for roughly 1,200 miles, or about 1,900 kilometers, making it one of the longest continental strike-slip fault systems on Earth. Running across central Alaska from west to east, it forms a broad tectonic boundary that separates crustal blocks moving in different directions. Unlike subduction zones, where one tectonic plate dives beneath another, or spreading centers where plates move apart, the Denali Fault is dominated by horizontal motion. Massive slabs of crust slide past each other over immense periods of time, storing strain that is occasionally released in powerful earthquakes. To someone standing beside the fault, nothing about it appears to be moving. Dense spruce forests grow undisturbed across parts of the landscape. Rivers flow through broad valleys carved by glaciers. Snow blankets mountain ridges for much of the year. Yet every second, tectonic forces generated hundreds of miles away continue pushing against this fault system. The movement is extraordinarily slow on a human timescale, measured in only fractions of an inch each year, but over millions of years, those tiny increments accumulate into hundreds of miles of total displacement. The engine driving the Denali Fault lies far to the south, where the Pacific Plate relentlessly converges with the North American Plate. Along southern Alaska, much of that convergence is absorbed at the offshore subduction zone, where dense oceanic crust descends beneath the continent. However, not every component of that motion disappears into the trench. A significant amount of stress is transferred inland, where it becomes concentrated along major strike-slip faults such as the Denali system. Rather than moving directly toward one another, the crust on opposite sides of the Denali Fault primarily slides sideways. Geologists describe this as right lateral strike-slip motion. Imagine standing on one side of the fault and looking across it. During an earthquake, the opposite side would appear to shift toward the right. Although that movement may measure only several feet or several meters during an individual rupture, repeated earthquakes over millions of years have transported entire geological formations astonishing distances from where they originally formed. The fault is not a single continuous crack slicing through the crust. Instead, it consists of numerous interconnected strands, bends, splays, and branching structures. Some sections are relatively straight, allowing motion to pass efficiently along the fault. Others curve, overlap, or intersect neighboring faults, creating regions where stresses become concentrated or redistributed. These geometric variations strongly influence whether a section remains locked for centuries or suddenly releases accumulated energy during a major earthquake. That realization has become one of the central themes of modern Denali Fault research. Scientists are no longer satisfied with simply mapping the surface trace. Instead, they are trying to understand the three-dimensional architecture hidden beneath Alaska's rugged terrain. Every buried fracture, damaged rock zone, and subtle change in fault geometry may influence where the next rupture begins or where it unexpectedly stops. During the present year, researchers launched one of the most ambitious field campaigns ever conducted along the Denali Fault. Described in a paper published in Seismological Research Letters, the project involved deploying hundreds of temporary seismic nodal instruments directly across the fault, Unlike traditional permanent seismic stations, which are often separated by many miles, these compact instruments were installed in an exceptionally dense arrangement designed to capture vibrations with unprecedented spatial detail. From above, the deployment resembles a carefully constructed scientific grid stretching across valleys and mountain slopes. Each node quietly records the faintest vibrations passing through the crust. Individually, every instrument contributes only a tiny piece of information. Collectively, however, they create an entirely new way of imaging the fault. Most earthquake monitoring networks are designed to detect earthquakes large enough to be located reliably across wide regions. Countless tiny earthquakes, each releasing only a minute amount of energy, remain invisible because the stations are simply too far apart. Dense nodal arrays dramatically change that picture. They detect thousands of subtle seismic signals that previously disappeared into background noise. Those tiny earthquakes are far more important than their size suggests. Every micro-earthquake marks a location where rocks briefly slipped under stress. When thousands of these events are combined, they begin outlining fractures, damaged zones, and hidden structures deep within the crust. It is rather like illuminating a dark cave, one tiny flashlight at a time, until the entire shape gradually emerges. Researchers hope these observations will reveal why certain portions of the Denali Fault appear mechanically different from others. Some segments repeatedly produce small earthquakes while remaining incapable of generating the largest ruptures. Other stretches remain eerily quiet, accumulating stress without obvious warning before eventually failing in a major earthquake. Understanding those differences represents one of the most challenging problems in earthquake science. Importantly, the deployment is not intended to predict the timing of future earthquakes. Scientists consistently emphasize that no reliable method currently exists for forecasting exactly when a major earthquake will occur along faults such as Denali. Instead, the objective is to improve understanding of fault mechanics, stress accumulation, and the physical properties controlling earthquake behavior. The hundreds of instruments are effectively allowing researchers to listen to the fault at an entirely new level. Vibrations generated by distant earthquakes, local micro-earthquakes, environmental noise, and even subtle wave reflections all carry information about the rocks through which they travel. Variations in wave speed can indicate fractured rock, fluid-filled zones, or changes in material strength that cannot be observed directly from the surface. Those observations are expected to improve computer models describing how stress builds across the fault over decades and centuries. More accurate models ultimately contribute to better seismic hazard assessments, helping engineers and emergency planners understand which regions may experience stronger shaking during future earthquakes. While scientists were expanding observations at the surface, another line of research was looking much deeper into Earth's interior. A team led by researchers from Brown University examined the geological setting of the Denali Fault from an entirely different perspective. Rather than focusing solely on fractures within the crust, they investigated the underlying lithosphere, the rigid outer shell of Earth consisting of both crust and the uppermost mantle. For decades, many continental strike-slip faults were interpreted primarily as shallow features that developed where stresses exceeded the strength of crustal rocks. The deeper mantle was often considered an indirect influence rather than a controlling factor. New evidence is challenging that long-standing assumption. The Brown University research found that the Denali Fault lies directly above a pronounced boundary separating regions where the lithosphere differs substantially in thickness. One side of the fault overlies a thicker, more rigid section of Earth's outer shell, while the opposite side rests above comparatively thinner lithosphere. Although this contrast exists tens of miles below the surface, it may have profoundly influenced where the fault ultimately formed. Differences in lithospheric thickness affect temperature, rock strength, density, and the way tectonic stresses are transmitted through the continent. Instead of stresses being distributed evenly, they may become concentrated along these deep transitions, encouraging faults to develop precisely above them. That possibility represents a major shift in scientific thinking. Rather than viewing the Denali Fault simply as a crack confined to the crust, researchers increasingly see it as the surface expression of a much larger tectonic architecture extending deep into Earth's interior. Visualizing this process requires imagining the continent not as a rigid slab, but as layers possessing different mechanical properties. Deep within the lithosphere, stronger regions resist deformation, while weaker regions yield more readily. Where those contrasting domains meet, tectonic stresses naturally concentrate. Over immense spans of geological time, repeated deformation may localize into a fault capable of accommodating enormous sideways motion. If confirmed through further studies, the implications extend far beyond Alaska. Similar deep lithospheric boundaries may influence the origin of major continental strike-slip faults across the world, including systems that have long puzzled geologists because their locations could not be fully explained by surface geology alone. For generations, researchers largely focused on what could be observed directly: displaced rivers, offset mountain ridges, fractured bedrock, and scarps etched across the landscape. Modern imaging techniques are now revealing that those spectacular surface features may merely represent the visible uppermost portion of tectonic systems, whose foundations extend far deeper than anyone previously imagined. Each new dataset collected across Alaska is adding another layer of understanding. Hundreds of sensitive seismic instruments are listening to vibrations too small for previous networks to detect. Advanced geophysical imaging is tracing variations in Earth's lithosphere that were invisible only a few years ago. Instead of replacing older geological knowledge, these discoveries are enriching it, connecting surface landforms with structures hidden many miles below. As those pieces continue coming together, scientists are beginning to see the Denali Fault not simply as one immense crack crossing Alaska, but as an integrated tectonic system whose behavior is controlled by interactions spanning nearly the entire thickness of Earth's rigid outer shell. Long before the first seismic instruments were carried into Alaska's mountains, the landscape itself had been recording the Denali Fault's history. Every offset valley, warped ridge, and displaced river preserved evidence of movement accumulating over immense spans of geological time. Yet translating those scattered clues into a complete picture has remained one of the greatest challenges in tectonic research. During the present year, scientists unveiled another major piece of that puzzle through a study reconstructing millions of years of motion along the Denali Fault system. Rather than examining individual earthquakes, the research explored how repeated interactions between neighboring faults gradually built one of North America's most dramatic mountain ranges. The study focused on the eastern Alaska Range, where the Denali Fault interacts with several companion faults that share the burden of accommodating tectonic strain. Instead of acting independently, these faults behave as an interconnected network in which movement along one structure influences stress and deformation along another. By combining detailed geological mapping, fault geometry, rock dating, and measurements of long-term displacement, researchers reconstructed how these relationships evolved over millions of years. Their findings demonstrated that the shape of the fault system itself has played a decisive role in determining where uplift became concentrated. Where strands converged, bent, or transferred motion between one another, crustal rocks were compressed and forced upward. In contrast, regions where movement was distributed across broader areas experienced less dramatic mountain building. Alaska's towering peaks therefore owe their existence not only to plate collision, but also to the intricate geometry of faults working together over extraordinary lengths of time. That conclusion helps explain why some of Alaska's highest mountains occupy remarkably specific locations instead of forming evenly across the landscape. The crust responds differently depending on how tectonic forces are channeled through the fault network. Even subtle changes in the angle between intersecting faults can alter where deformation accumulates, gradually sculpting the terrain into the rugged mountain ranges visible today. While researchers reconstructed the surface evolution of the Denali system, another team was looking much deeper into the Earth, using thousands of earthquakes that had gone unnoticed for years. Advances in seismic processing allowed scientists to identify approximately 3,000 previously undetected earthquakes occurring beneath southern Alaska. Individually, these events were too small to attract attention, but together they revealed an astonishing pattern. Rather than appearing randomly scattered, the earthquakes aligned along an almost perfectly straight line deep within the crust. Such an organized distribution immediately suggested the presence of a hidden geological boundary. Further analysis revealed that the earthquakes outlined the buried edge of the Yakutat microplate, a thick fragment of crust that continues to be forced beneath southern Alaska as tectonic convergence proceeds. The Yakutat microplate differs significantly from typical oceanic crust. It is unusually thick and buoyant, making its descent into the mantle far more complicated than that of ordinary seafloor. As it presses beneath Alaska, it distorts the surrounding crust, redistributes stress, and alters the behavior of faults extending far inland. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the discovery was its relationship with the Denali Fault. The newly identified line of hidden earthquakes lies close to the fault system, indicating that deep structures associated with the buried microplate may be influencing stress within the overlying crust. Instead of viewing the Denali Fault as an isolated fracture, scientists increasingly recognize that its behavior may be linked to tectonic processes occurring many miles below the surface. Even more striking was another coincidence revealed by the study. The buried edge of the Yakutat microplate aligns closely with the region where the devastating 2002 Denali earthquake began. Although this relationship does not imply that the microplate directly triggered the earthquake, it suggests that deep geological boundaries may influence where large ruptures are capable of initiating. Understanding these hidden controls represents one of the most exciting frontiers in modern earthquake science. The 2002 earthquake itself continues to serve as one of the world's most valuable natural laboratories. Registering a magnitude of 7.9, it ruptured approximately 205 miles, or about 330 kilometers, across central Alaska. The event remains among the largest continental strike-slip earthquakes ever instrumentally recorded and fundamentally changed scientific understanding of earthquake rupture. Rather than remaining confined to a single fault, the rupture propagated through multiple connected fault segments before transferring onto the Totshunda Fault. This ability to jump from one fault to another demonstrated that neighboring faults cannot always be treated as independent hazards. Under favorable conditions, a rupture may continue far beyond what traditional models once considered possible. Researchers also documented exceptionally rapid rupture propagation, with the fracture racing across the fault at speeds exceeding several kilometers per second. Within only a matter of minutes, enormous sections of crust shifted sideways by several yards or several meters, permanently altering rivers, forests, roads, and pipelines. Some areas experienced horizontal offsets, measuring more than 20 feet or over 6 meters, illustrating the immense energy released as decades to centuries of accumulated strain were discharged almost instantaneously. The earthquake provided scientists with an unprecedented opportunity to compare the Denali Fault with another of the world's great continental strike-slip systems, the San Andreas Fault in California. Although the two faults exist within different tectonic settings, both accommodate large amounts of horizontal motion and both possess long histories of generating destructive earthquakes. Lessons learned from Alaska continue to improve understanding of rupture behavior on major strike-slip faults worldwide. Today, every new seismic deployment, every refined geological map, and every hidden earthquake detected beneath Alaska adds another layer of knowledge to a system that is proving far more intricate than once believed. The Denali Fault is no longer viewed merely as a surface fracture separating blocks of crust. It is increasingly recognized as the visible expression of a deeply interconnected tectonic system extending from mountain peaks to the lithosphere and influenced by the buried Yakutat microplate far below. Although scientists cannot predict when its next major earthquake will occur, each discovery is steadily revealing why this immense fault behaves the way it does, bringing researchers closer to understanding one of North America's most remarkable geological structures.